All right, Nancy, I think you can, everybody has sort of reseated themselves, so you can go ahead and start.
Great. I just want to make sure that my screen is showing. It looks like it is in the big room.
It is here.
Wonderful. Okay, let's see if I can advance. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you for having me this evening. I am Nancy Graham, and I am the supervising project manager of the community plan update. I have a large team that helps work on this project, but I'm the one here to answer questions tonight. Tate Galloway is also physically in the room. The team putting this together asked that I do my presentation on Zoom because we felt it would record better, the audio would be better. And since we are making a recording of this video that would be on our website, we thought that this would work better this way. So that is why I'm on Zoom tonight. Okay. There we go. So to start out, for people who might be a little bit newer to this process, wanting to just recap that the community plan update, this process has been going on for a long time. It started back in 2018. There's a subcommittee of this group that's met several times with city staff in order to collect a lot of input to help craft an updated community plan. And so we are in this purple spot right here. What we are presenting tonight is something called the community discussion draft, and that is the very first complete draft of the plan. It is not the one that we send to environmental review. It's the one that we present as a first draft in order to take the most amount of public comment on. So that's why we have this draft available for 3 months. We are working with the subcommittee to have a lot of meetings happen in order to discuss it, and so we can collect input on this draft. I will repeat this at the end of the presentation, but what kind of happens from here is that later on this summer, we will release the official draft community plan, and that will include the zoning map. And then we will also put forward the draft environmental impact report, and that's where we look at the environmental impact of a lot of the policies in this plan, and look at potential mitigation to deal with any impacts that might arise from the plan. And then looking into late 2023, after we go through the environmental process, we collect input on the environmental impact report, and then we make revisions to the draft plan to make the final draft and the final draft environmental impact report. And those are the ones that go through the public hearing process, and that's when plan adoption happens. And we're trying to get this all done within 2023. So that's what we're working on right now. Okay, so if you have not seen the plan, you can download it on planuniversity.org. There's 2 formats. There is what we call the on-screen viewing format of this, recognizing that a lot of people may never print this plan. We do kind of a 2-up is what it's called, where we put the pages together. So it's really designed that you can view it on a screen better. But we also did make a print version. So in case you wanted to print a double-sided print copy, we make those formats easier in order to make it so you can either view it on screen very easily, or you could print out a hard copy for yourself if you wanted to do it. If anyone has trouble with the links, we originally had them on our regular web server, and that was pretty slow. We have moved them onto an Amazon server that downloads much faster. So if you have any trouble with the links, let us know, and we'll make sure that you can get the plan. So I want to start with the basis of the plan, what was used to construct this draft. I want to remind everyone that we have a citywide policy framework, and all of our plan updates that we're doing are looking to bring some of our older plans into alignment with those plans. And those plans are the City of San Diego General Plan, the Climate Action Plan, our housing element, the Parks Master Plan, and also newer in this plan is Climate Resilient SD. SD. And so we included some new things in this plan because climate resilient SD was adopted last year. And that was the first of that document. So you'll see some elements of that woven into the plan. We also have a series of guiding principles that were worked on with the subcommittee. There's a lot of information on that on previous meetings. So we brought those into the plan. And then there's also this concept of the plan priorities. And so I want to introduce those. So these plan priorities are really why the city is updating the plan and what the updated plan, what are the priorities that this updated plan is trying to achieve. And those priorities are supporting a thriving economy, maximizing transit investment success, allowing a variety of new homes, ensuring a sustainable future, and having streets designed for people. And so in the plan, there's a spread about all of these priorities and more information about them. And then these topics are woven through all of the chapters of the plan. So in the plan, there are 7 main topical chapters, and that's the vision and land use framework, urban design, mobility, parks and recreation, open space and conservation, historic preservation, public facilities, services, and safety. There's also an implementation chapter I'll talk about later. Every community plan, we do have some version of this because open space and conservation is such an important aspect of this community. It did get a dedicated chapter, unlike some of our other community plans that sometimes have that woven into the parks and recreation section. But we decided to really make that more prominent in this plan. So that's why there's the extra chapter. But the rest of these you see in all of our new modern plans. And so one of the things that is really a major component of the plan is the land use map. And we've had a lot of meetings on the land use map. And we did make some changes to scenario A in order to and what we're calling is the plan land use map. And so in this, the build out changes slightly, and we had about 30,000 in the last one. We're at 32,500. The jobs number actually went down. It's down to 59,000. Some of that was we noticed a calculation error that we had done previously. So that's why that number went down. But we feel that this number is a more accurate reflection of the potential build out. There's also new supportive infrastructure included in the plan. And we're also looking to dedicate over 130 acres of open space as part of the plan. So the land use map has details of this, but I'm going to review with you those changes. One thing I want to remind people is that in creating the land use plan, community input is a big aspect of it, but there's also other things that we take into consideration. And those are a general plan, climate, housing, and equity goals. That's what I introduced in the existing policy framework. We do look at Sandag's demographic and growth projections. And then we also look at opportunity and market feasibility, trying to figure out what is reasonable to actually be built in the plan horizon. And all of those factors come into play when we make our land use maps. So the refinements that we made, I want to point this out. I'll start with the one on the right. This is something that we had heard from the Plan UC group, pointing out that this parcel that's on the corner of Governor and Regents in South UC has been developed as condos, and it didn't make sense to have it with a commercial designation. The existing designation is commercial, but we are just moving it to an equivalent residential designation. We did recognize that that made more sense, that this is unlikely to redevelop in the plan horizon. So we did change that to an equivalent residential designation. We also removed density on this site right here, which is owned by Garden. The reason why it's very newly developed, and we didn't think that it would likely redevelop during the plan horizon. Across the street, we did up the designation of this property. The reason that we raised that is that it is vacant land and there's very little vacant land left in the community. And so it seemed like a good opportunity to get a little bit more housing in this location, and it made more sense. So we did raise the designation here. We also raised the designation here and here. I know that there are some concerns about having a higher designation next to canyons, but I will review later in this PowerPoint that we built in some protection for canyons as part of that. But these sites are just right adjacent to the transit station and the urban area. And so recognizing that in order to meet our greenhouse gas emission goals, we really need to be increasing densities next to transit, and that these seem like the most reasonable sites in order to do that. We also originally on the urban village had a 90 dwelling unit per acre here. We did move that to 109. It's really very insignificant on the scale of the plan. The reason why we did this is looking at some of the more recent plans that they used a 109 dwelling unit per acre for this level of density, and having a community be different can cause conflicts, and it can be harder for development services later. So we just thought making it consistent with the other plans would be better in the long run. So that's why we made that change. So those are the changes between what we had called scenario A to the land use map that's in the plan. And like I said, it did raise the unit count up a little bit, but we were also able to better refine our employment that brought that count down. One thing that we have been asked many times is to illustrate these different densities, and we had indicated that we would do that in the plan. We did do that in the plan. We looked at individual projects that we felt really represented types of projects that would be built in these designations. We did use pictures from inside the community when they made sense. Sometimes we chose pictures from outside the community to be aspirational of things that we would like to see with these land use changes. But all of the land uses in the plan are now illustrated, so you can look at those specifically. Moving on to urban design, we put a lot of effort into providing direction in order to make sure that when the buildings are built, that they are built in compatible ways with the surrounding development, as well as environmental conditions. So you can see different drawings that we put together on doing tower controls to make sure that towers themselves are not too massive and really too imposing in the community, but separated into smaller, thinner towers to allow more light to come through. There's direction for building next to freeways in order to lessen the impact onto those buildings. So making buildings perpendicular to the freeway, using parking structures to shield homes from the freeway itself. We give direction on above ground parking structures, recognizing that that is something that's popular in this community. And so if they are built, we want to make sure that they are more compatible, as well as really focusing on the first 2 stories of a building, that's what you experience the most. And so providing a lot of direction on that. In addition, discussing canyon adjacent development, we are having development be set back away from the canyon, and then beyond that have the building step back. So this is a building that exists in San Diego next to, I believe, Switzer Canyon, and it's designed this way. So essentially, if there's shadows, the shadow of the building shadows onto itself in order to minimize the impact that happens onto the canyon. And so this is one of the things that we included in our supplemental development regulations. I'll get into that a little bit further, but we actually codified a lot of these requirements. So if there is development next to the canyon, it will be better protected than the regular zoning provides. We also focused a lot on this concept of the 5 Ps. We talked about this a lot in our different meetings that we've had over the years, but we really tried to illustrate them, provide inspirational examples of them and where they can be located. So for Promenade, this is the Executive Drive Promenade. We're envisioning that it will have different zones, that the block down by the JCC and the entrance to UCSD would be more recreational, and that being able to improve that area with more recreation amenities would fit really well with the existing uses, having the park there and having the JCC there. The transition zone, recognizing that there is a grade change on the north side. And so we developed drawings that kind of show how that grade change could be accommodated into buildings. And then the more commercial zone is when that area becomes flat and much more an office development, that would have a more commercial feeling to it. So we look to illustrate all of those different zones within the promenade. We also did a lot of work on platforms. If you've been to Oakland City Center, it's a really good example of when you come out of BART, that even though the BART is at a different grade, it's actually underground in that location, but it's still the same concept, is that when you come out of transit, you come into this wide open plaza. There's a lot of, the buildings are right off of that. And we see a lot of opportunity, particularly at Executive Drive, but some of the other stations as well, that these platforms could be better integrated right into development. And so we did some drawings to kind of show what that would look like. Podiums, recognizing that above ground parking, as well as just buildings themselves, that there's an opportunity to reclaim some of that space as more public and amenity space. We found a really nice example. It's from Singapore, but really how you could get some very green spaces on top of buildings. So we would like to see more of these paseos, or these really vibrant connections through development that are activated, that have people spaces, that can really provide greater connectivity through larger blocks, but also be amenity space and public spaces. And then plazas as well, small plazas, but also large plazas, ones that can be programmed and that can be used really to have more social gathering space. And so this also was codified in our supplemental development regulations, which I'll get to in a later slide. We have a section on urban greening, really looking at how we can make stormwater infrastructure greener, as well as improve street trees. We have a full street tree palette that we've developed and recommendations for where those street trees should go. And we've given you examples of what those trees look like in order to see how university really could just continue to be greener, especially in the urban areas. We also did some area specific direction. Much of this was in our previous urban design study that we had published as part of SANDAG. We had received a lot of comments on that draft, and we did incorporate many of the comments that we received into the maps that went actually into the plan. We did add a new area for Miramar. Now, we did not recommend any land use changes in this area, but just because there's not a land use change, it doesn't mean that a property potentially wouldn't redevelop over the horizon. So we still wanted to provide urban design direction for all properties in the community, even if there's not going to be a land use change, in case something were to redevelop, that there would be some direction on how it could be more cohesive with the community. And we've also identified some new community education opportunities. We talked to the water department, and Pure Water will be having some community education opportunities. So we wanted to reflect that. There's also some very large vernal pools in this area, and we thought that there could be an opportunity for people to learn more about vernal pools. And so those are kind of the highlights, but recognizing that this area, other than incorporating maybe more trees and more shade, probably isn't going to change too much, but we did include it in the plan. For mobility, we did have a meeting 2 months ago where we went a lot of detail into mobility. But again, the focus is on complete streets and smart corridors. We did illustrate those so you can get a better idea of what are the different components of a smart corridor or a complete street. We also illustrated bicycle boulevards. So kind of this future infrastructure, what would that look like? We brought that into the plan. We also included a bunch of mobility maps. You had seen those at the meeting that we had 2 months ago. We did make some changes based upon those input, not very significant changes, but there are a couple of changes that we made. And all of those network maps are available in the plan. And we did try to improve the symbology to make them a little easier to understand. We also did a similar thing where if we could make the legend illustrative, we did try to illustrate those legends to make these maps a little bit easier to understand as well. Moving on to Parks and Recreation, we have identified some new park facilities that were not in previously released maps. So I do want to identify that. The city traditionally has had its joint use opportunities with schools. One that we are looking at, the Montessori school that's in South UC next to Marcy Park. That's actually owned by San Diego Unified. So we are interested in working with San Diego Unified to get a joint use agreement built into the lease of that facility. But the city is also looking beyond schools for joint use opportunities. So we have identified some other places in the community that may have opportunities, maybe partnering with UCSD, with what's going on at the Preuss School, or maybe with the JCC or with Westfield to look at doing some more joint use and looking beyond San Diego Unified for joint use opportunities. So we did identify that. We could consider more if people have more ideas for those joint uses, but we did identify those. And then we did find when we were doing our study of the Miramar area that there is this small little grassy area that already exists that we thought maybe could be a small little pocket park, overlook park. We know that parks are very important to this community and we really want to get as many opportunities as we can. So we did add this new opportunity to this map that hadn't been released before because we didn't have that idea before. We did do a full park inventory. We name all of the different facilities, how many points they have now, how many points they will have in the future, and did some totaling of the parks. So we did identify over 6,000 new parks that park points that could happen. We do still have a deficit of about 5,000 points, but we were able to find a very large amount of new facilities and improvements that are included in the plan. We also include ideas for trails and overlooks. The idea in South UC that it would be one of these segments, not both. And then we have another one identified in North UC. We do not have an alignment for these trails put in the map. We kind of used a blob to indicate kind of the general area where we anticipate a trail could be developed, but we are not identifying a specific route at this level of planning. We also, as I mentioned, put together an open space section. I do want to recognize Debbie Knight and Karen Strauss, who contributed photos and captions that we use in the plan. Some of the prettiest photos in the plan came from them. But one of the things that we are bringing forward with the plan update is some open space dedications. Those are subject to city council action. So that's why that's noted here. We would remove this if that action is taken when the plan is adopted. But the idea is that some existing open space would become dedicated open space as actions that move forward with the plan. There is a historic resources section. We identify a nice historic inventory of the community, different prominent buildings that were developed and the development history. And we got some really nice photos from the San Diego History Center that really show the nice development of how the community has changed over the years. So hopefully that'll be an interesting section for you to review. We don't map anything in our community plans. None of our newer plans map historic resources. We do with the environmental document, there will be a historic context statement that has additional information about historic resources that can be used for future identification of sites, but that's not something we do at the plan level. But we do like to put kind of that development history and context into the plan because we think that's helpful in the big picture. We have our public facilities, services, and safety section. One thing that I mentioned earlier is that this plan integrates some of the information from Resilient SD. Resilient SD. So we have the heat exposure index. There's a fire map that's in there and some other maps that haven't been in previous plans. We're still working out the details of the best way to include that information because we recognize that sometimes that information can change, but we did go ahead and include maps in the first draft, just wanting to be responsive to the policy framework that was already in place. And then we also have all of the public facilities detailed in our existing and planned public facilities map that's in that section. The implementation section, all of the plan policies are consolidated into the implementation section. So they're each color coded to the different chapters of the plan. The one that I have just kind of on display is from open space. So when you go through and look, really the chapter itself sets up the policy context, and then you go to the implementation section where all of the plan policies are consolidated. And then the last thing that I want to go over in the plan is something that we call the community plan implementation overlay zone. And so we have been using this strategy in our newer plans. Some older plans have it as well. I think that's how your development intensity districts are implemented, that we are able to introduce code into our community plans through an overlay zone to supplement the zoning itself. And so that's why we have something called supplemental development regulations. And so the first thing I want to go over is those 5 Ps that we put into the plan. We did codify them that any development that happens in these purple areas will have to provide one of the 5 Ps as long as the site is big enough, and we put some standards in there. We did also include this on commercial properties, not just residential properties. That is something new for university. A lot of the previous plans only required this park and public space as part of residential projects. We are requiring them also on commercial projects with this plan. We also have some requirements to break down mega blocks to make things more walkable and increase pedestrian connectivity. There's vehicle parking design that integrates that drawing that I showed earlier with parking structures, but also some more things about parking. The tower controls I showed easier. We introduced code for that. To meet a lot of the different roadways for adding bike lanes or different places. There's some places that we need some roadway dedications. So we did outline those in the plan where some additional private property will be needed to accommodate modifications to roadways. Something that we heard a lot of comment about since releasing the draft land use plan is concerns about community serving retail. And so we did put a requirement for the sites that have the community village designations. So those are the Sprouts and the Vaughn Center that's over in this area here. All the ones that have community village, that they do have requirements to include community serving retail if they are redeveloped, and that is codified in there. We also will have a requirement for on-site affordable housing. We did not, we are still studying that to figure out what is the precise number that's appropriate. We will be releasing that number with the next draft, but we, because we're still doing the economic research on that, we were not able to provide it, but we did include that we will be having a requirement in the plan just to make sure that that's communicated early, and so people know that that will be in the plan. We also have some area specific requirements where there are sites that are adjacent to canyons and adjacent to freeways. We identified those sites as well where the those additional development regulations would come into play on those properties. And so those are all in the supplemental development regulations. So that's a great chapter where we are able to show how we've tried to be responsive to a lot of the comments that we've received thus far. So going back to our timeline, I mentioned this in the beginning, we did release the community discussion draft plan. And so we're now in this community review of that document. As I said earlier in the meeting, if you joined us late, we would like to receive all comments digitally to that plan university at sandiego.gov email address, because then we have a one consolidated place where all input was received. So we're asking for you to email them to that email address, not to me, but that you can CC me if you'd like, but really it should go to that, that email address. And then later this summer is when we would be releasing the official draft plan and a zoning map. And then the draft EIR as well. That would happen later this summer, and we'll collect community input on both of those documents. And then late this year is when we would be releasing the final documents and going into our public hearing process. As you know, community and public input is ongoing throughout this whole process, but these are kind of the major steps that are left. Next, we'll move to a discussion and a Q&A section. But again, here's that email address. If you want to send comments, that's definitely the best place for all input that you have for us to receive it. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. We're going to get people to move around the table here for just a sec, so we don't get a lot of back and forth with the audience. I'm going to ask the UCPG board members to make comments first. Then I'll go to subcommittee members, and then we'll also grab any subcommittee members that may be in the Zoom audience. And I know there's a couple of UCPG members in the Zoom audience that were unable to be here. They can ask questions, but that's it. Okay. All right. Okay, so Joanne Selleck, here, just a sec. Let me grab the.
What are we commenting on? Are we commenting on the plan, or are we commenting on? How do you want to do this?
Yeah. So Nancy, how would you like the feedback for this particular meeting organized?
I mean, I think what would be the most helpful is if there's questions on the draft. I mean, if you have comments, we'll just say thank you. I mean, that's kind of in the comment received, but if you have questions, I can try to answer them or let you know if I have to follow up on that. But this is your meeting and your time, so.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, for the UCPG, we haven't had a formal presentation of the plan update details so far. So I think that anything you want to ask on that basis is fair game. For the subcommittee members, perhaps it should be a bit more on process, because we'll have more opportunities next week and in the following months. So because not everybody has seen all the details of the plan yet, I would suspect higher order or higher level questions are probably better than very detailed ones at this point. So yes, Isabel K.
This is on, right?
Let me make sure. I think I might have.
Now it's on.
Yes.
Thank you. This is a very general question, and regarding the open space, but specifically the recreational open space. And I know that there was some controversy about rating recreational space with the park point system that was developed as part of the master plan update. So I'm assuming that people will have access to that system, which substituted infrastructure for space in parks. But that being said, if we're only halfway there, is there any opportunity to actually acquire more open space? It seems like that's what we really need. You said we were missing 5,000 park points, but can there be some acquisition for the public? I'm a little bit concerned that when we've discussed these green spaces in the past, where they're plazas, but they're actually privately owned, they're not really accessible to the public if the property owner decides to close them at night or close them, under certain circumstances. So can you describe how, or is that something that will be discussed in detail? Is it already there, or?
Sure. So I can explain that. So to kind of answer everything that you brought up, the Parks Master Plan has already been adopted. How the point system works is fully detailed in the Parks Master Plan. So if you would like to learn more about that system, I would recommend you look there. Our plan has the points for all of the different facilities, how many points is existing, and then what we see as potential park points, including some new facilities that we've added. If you have more ideas for new facilities, we're happy to take those ideas as comments. In terms of accessing, so with our community plan implementation overlay zone, we are requiring projects to make those Ps, whether it's a promenade, a plaza, or a paseo. But in order to get recreation points for those, to have the fees that people pay towards recreation for that to apply, they have to put a recreation easement on their property. So there may be some properties that build that plaza and don't seek recreation points from it, and then they will still have to pay the recreation fees. But if they want what they build to count towards recreation, then they have to put a recreation easement on it, and it has to be developed with the council policy where the design of that space is done with the community. So that that whole public process does not go away if someone wants to get recreation credit for the space that they create.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Karen. Yeah, we grab the, oh, I have it. Sorry, there we go.
Yeah, so my main question and concern has to do with the CPAS, which looks to me like it includes just about every parcel that's being upzoned. And it says right in the beginning on page 189 that any development permit within the CPAS that satisfies those 25 SDRs can be processed as a ministerial permit.
So if something else triggers a discretionary permit, they still have to do that. So if they need a site development permit, that doesn't get them out of those requirements. But how this is designed is if you don't want to do those things, you are put into a discretionary process. But if you do meet those requirements, you can be processed ministerially. So that is the incentive to get developers to do this, is that they get the benefit of the environmental document and they get to go through a ministerial process, but they have to follow those rules. If they don't follow those rules, then they're kicked into a discretionary process. And then that's when they would go before the planning group. They have to go through a whole discretionary process to get their permits. So it doesn't alleviate needs. If you have to get a discretionary permit for another reason, you still have to get a discretionary permit, but you cannot process ministerially without doing these things.
So does this mean that if a developer does, the bare minimum required to meet those 25 SDRs, then they don't have to come before the planning group or the planning commission? There's no opportunity for public input. There's no discussion of it. They just get their permit.
If it's a ministerial project, yes. That's how all ministerial projects work in the city.
So that means I'm just looking at the list of things that aren't mentioned in those SDRs. They wouldn't have to put in any EV spaces, bike parking, showers, no requirement.
So they have to do that
doing
per the code. They still have to do everything required per the code. So they still have to meet all the cap requirements. And so that's all built into the code as well. So these are things on top of the code that they have to do.
So what about, for instance, under mobility at the meeting in February, I think there was a question about how for instance, the bike infrastructure, bike lanes and cycle tracks would be paid for. And the answer was that when a property was being redeveloped, that the city would ask them as part of the permitting process to also pay to make the improvements needed for the bit of the street fronting their property. But that would not happen, as I understand it, if they satisfy these SDRs and do a ministerial.
Correct. Ministerial projects still have to improve their frontage per the requirements of the community plan. So that's why we have those dedications for areas if we need additional land that's built into the SDRs, but you still have to bring your frontage up to the citywide road standards. So putting in the different facilities that are required by the streets master plan that are, the street development manual. That might not be the exact term if someone wants to text me the exact one, but there's the street design manual. That's what it is. The city has a street design manual. And when you bring a ministerial project forward, you still have to improve your frontage per the street design manual.
Including bringing it up to meeting what's in the community plan under the mobility, like all of the changes to the streets and the bike lanes and
right. So we can do some deferred agreements if there's a situation where building a certain segment at one time doesn't make sense, but ministerial projects still have to improve their frontage. So it may end up being deferred until a couple properties can be done at once, but this developer still have to do that. It doesn't matter if they're discretionary or ministerial.
Okay. So the one thing that I think would be helpful, I mean, this is kind of a bigger thing, is in reading through the plan, that was not at all obvious to me. I don't know where in the plan it says you have to do that. If it doesn't say that in the plan, if it's somewhere else. So, I'm talking about mobility as an example, but I think there are a lot of things like that. Like, how do we figure out that even though something isn't explicitly laid out in the plan, that it's still required?
So the plan says you still have to follow the land development code, and that's all in the land development code. And the land development code is probably thousands of pages of regulations. So we can't bring the entire land development code into the plan, but this is kind of where I can answer questions and things like that about just the regular development process. But that's how the plan acknowledges it, is that the land development code, it still governs all of these sites.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to ask Roger to ask a question. Roger Kavanaugh. I'm going to try to identify people.
Yeah, hi,
as we do
Nancy.
this.
From what you said in your presentation, the city has yet to recommend an affordable housing requirement that would be built into the plan. Is that correct? Is my interpretation correct there?
Well, we're doing an economic study and we're bringing in an expert to help us figure out that percentage. It's a very complicated equation to do that. And so we are bringing in outside help to help us with it.
Okay, so we're waiting to hear what that is.
Yes, and we'll
Just-
announce it
yeah.
with the next draft.
Just a piece of information. A couple of weeks ago on Nextdoor, there was a single mom of a couple kids living in one of those buildings, one of the affordable buildings, just south of Nobel between Genesee and Regents. And she said her rent was just increased $300 a month and she needed help to be able to stay in her apartment. So I think the pressure that we've been anticipating on more affordable units is there already. And I'm wondering, if we stick with a lower number, like the city ordinance is 10%, whether or not our community is just going to be unaffordable for the kinds of people that are already there. When I look at housing statistics in other countries, what I find is unless there's some national jurisdictional policy that really supports affordable housing on a much higher level than our 10% affordable, then we don't have home ownership. We don't have affordable housing. What we have is people getting by with higher percentages of their income devoted to housing. When I first came here 40 years ago, a person like myself was able to buy a condo. The price of the condo has gone up 9 times since then. So I know that for most people, their salary in that time has not gone up 9 times. So our community is being reshaped as we speak to a less and less affordability. So I would hope that whatever the figure the city comes back with is very, very robust and is much more than just 10, 20%, because that will not do the job.
So I would say that that's why we're taking our time on this, is to study this a little bit more, but we are open to any input that the community has on what they would like to see in terms of percentages or what income requirements would align with those percentages. So you're welcome to submit that with your input, and we'll bring that to the consultant that we're working with, the public input that we collected as well.
Okay, and sorry, so for this input in particular, if you want comments through Plan University at sandiego.gov to specifically address this, those should be specifically mentioned in the email, correct? Yeah,
I just want to say that we're definitely taking public input on this. We are working with an expert because this is we need to bring in outside help in terms of really looking at development economics to get this right. But we're still very open to public input on it. So if you submit any public input about this particular SDR, we will share that with our consultant that we're working with on this.
Okay, thanks. Other questions or comments? Yes, Linda Bernstein. Mike, yes.
I have some comments and then I have 1 or 2 questions. Can you hear? Is that good?
If you hold it up, it's good.
Is that good? Hold it up.
Yeah, kind of angled into the, yeah.
Is that good? Is that good?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
great.
perfect. Okay.
Fifth time the charm here. My first impression of the discussion draft is that it still proposes too much additional density. I'm not opposed to increased density, but this proposal seeks to more than double the number of housing units in the University City Plan area, and that seems unreasonable. The reason I think it's unreasonable is because there are no required provisions to improve traffic lanes, increase public services, or increase parks. The plan discusses goals and opportunities to do things, but there's no guarantee that these needed infrastructure items will actually be funded or get implemented. On a more specific note, I think this proposal for the increased density at the 2 shopping centers on Governor Drive is too much. Current zoning allows for 200 plus units at each location. That is still a significant amount of housing that could be added to these areas. And while that area technically is a sustainable development area, in reality, neither location meet the transportation criteria because we do not have the needed bus service, and it seems unlikely that we will. Those were just comments. I really want to ask you 2 or 3 questions though, Nancy. I want to know if scenario B is still being considered. That's the first question. I want to know, secondly, are Sprouts and Vons, which are currently mixed zoned use, are they going to remain with the current zoning? And are their height restrictions going to remain the same? Sprouts has a 30-foot height restriction and Vons has a 50-foot height restriction. There are houses adjacent to the Sprouts shopping center that would be severely impacted if anything went higher than the 30-foot current zoning. And also, how will the requirement be enforced that retail and essential services are to remain at those shopping centers? Thanks.
So what is included in the body of the plan is the staff recommended land use plan. That's why it's in the plan. We did include the slip sheets for scenario B, and that is there, and that can be considered by the council if the council so chooses to implement that plan. But the staff recommended plan is what is in the body of the plan. And that does include land use changes on the Sprouts and Vons shopping center, and that it would increase densities and the height limit would be increased on those properties if the plan is adopted as written.
Hey, who has, oh, yeah.
I don't have.
You didn't like?
Yeah, sorry. Joanne. Thanks.
Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, just stick it up.
Great.
Yeah. there you go.
Nancy, maybe I missed it in your presentation, but I think you said with respect to some of the vehicular corridors, if you will, that one of the things that's being considered is the possibility that the city will need to take some of private property through, I assume, inverse condemnation or something like that, condemnation proceedings. What areas are you, what streets are you thinking of needs that?
So it's listed in the plan, in the supplemental development regulations, what streets to what extent, and it's only a couple of feet. So it's usually where we can't get a bike lane in, we have requested some additional feet. So all the dedications are on page 200. So you can see each of those streets from what extent and how many feet they are. So they're 10 feet or 12 feet, but they're all listed on page 200 of what those requests are. So basically when private development redevelops, they would have to scoot back a little bit to capture that area to create the roadway infrastructure that's needed for that roadway segment. But that's only done as part of development. We don't come in and do that without private development happening. So that's part of the requirement of improving their frontage.
Okay. I actually don't see that I have, maybe it's 200 pages as opposed to my PDF version. All right, I'll look at that further. The other thing, and this is just, it's a general comment. I'm not going to go through the multitude of comments I have about the draft already, and I haven't finished it. But one of the things that I realized was as I started reading it and started like round zero, you know, what we're trying to accomplish here and the goals and the description of the community that hadn't hit me 3 years ago or whenever we started, is there's no acknowledgement, and I think it needs to be there, of the fact that we already have in North UC a very sizable existing residential community in several places. And if you read the way the plan reads, it talks about, you know, the wonderful business opportunities in North UC and shopping opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And there's absolutely no discussion of the existing residential communities and the services that they rely on. And the impact, people say, well, you're a NIMBY, blah, blah, blah. I'm not. I've got these high rises in my backyard. But there's absolutely no discussion of how some of these substantial high rises are going to impact communities. I think of Bill Beck, for example. I'm close enough to the canyon that maybe that's not an issue. I think of Isabel, where she is. And I think it's a significant lifestyle issue that needs to be considered and actually articulated in the plan.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Joanne. Okay, let me go to, Andy. Okay, all right, and then I want to get to Katie at some point, but the board needs to go first. Okay. Yeah, in this.
All right, I'll say a few things, and I was going to say some positive things after 35 years teaching and 20 years parenting. It seems like starting with the positives is a good place to go. And so Nancy, I wanted to start by acknowledging the amount of work that you and your team has undertaken, and to recognize that this has not been an easy undertaking, and also that you came into this project personally midstream at a moment of a great deal of controversy and conflict. And so I think it's important simply to recognize that and appreciate the work that you've done in trying to guide us since then.
Thank you.
I went through this carefully, and I'll have a lot more to say in both in public and in just direct comments, written comments that I'll provide. But I think it's important for us to recognize some of the positive things that we've got here, to state those things publicly, and then also to recognize that there's the devil in the details, and that there's things that still need to be improved. But there's also improvement on the basis of some things that are moving in the right direction. I appreciate that the draft reaffirms that the goal of the University Community Plan update is to affirmatively further fair housing, that projects will provide affordable housing near jobs, that the city is going to include an inclusionary affordable housing minimum. And I'll talk more about that in terms of the devil in the details. I appreciate that the plan reaffirms that there won't be rezoning of single family areas in the community. I appreciate the open space dedication confirmation here. I also appreciate the language that suggests that shopping centers will be revitalized, which is to say not replaced. And I think that that's critical to recognize. There is some language in the SDRs on protection of community serving retail, and I think probably we need some strengthening there, but I think that that's a step in the right direction. If we're going to increase people in this community, they're going to need places to shop and to be served. Otherwise, the plan will be a wreck. I appreciate that the linear parks are here on Regents, both sides, Governor Drive. The executive promenade is a good idea, and that came out of this group and its conversations. I also appreciate that there's a range of bike and pedestrian infrastructure in this plan. The devil will be in making sure that actually gets built, but the planning is there. The follow through in the previous plan has not been there over 30 years, and it would be important to see that actually is followed through on here. But this is a start. And I would note that there's a range of that bike and pedestrian infrastructure in the street right-of-ways where it belongs. There is some errant, I think, mobility planning in some of our MSCP areas and our 100-year floodplain. In fact, our Rose Creek. The bed of Rose Creek has a mobility trail in it. The bed of Rose Creek is a creek right now and has been for the last 3 months. So there's 4 months of water in the mobility corridor that the city has proposed here. So there's some adjustments that need to be made in that perspective. I appreciate that the plan recognizes the interface between UCSD's East Campus and the university community. I think that's important, and that'll be a step forward to improve the communication across Regents Road and La Jolla Village Drive, where the East Campus meets UC. I also appreciate some of the SDRs. The context-sensitive design makes sense near open space. Setbacks and step backs are a good start. We may need some more protections there, but that's a good start. I appreciate the language related to native and low water planting in the green trees, but we should note that there's only one native tree listed in all of the city's list of street trees. We've got to do better there. I appreciate the green streets and the urban greening proposals, and I think that that's an opportunity that we can take advantage of. More on that in a minute. I also appreciate two other things: the on-site park requirement for residential development of greater than 2 acres. That's positive, and the SDRs for development and commercial development to include some of that public space there. Some of the details that you just suggested about about that being voluntary, we need to work that out just a little bit more to make sure that that's actually something that people do choose to do, and don't just all choose not to do. I would suggest a couple things for next time. One, I think there'll be a lot of conversation about streets and road diets and Governor Drive in particular. And if we can get if you can bring to the meeting street diagrams, which have some of the key streets, so we can actually see what's being proposed. What do you mean by 1 lane, reducing Governor to 1 lane? What would that actually look like in the proposal, so that we can talk about this with actual concrete material right in front of us, and not what we imagine 1 lane in each direction might look like. Okay. And then I would say a couple of recommendations for right now, and more to come. First off, I think the plan, I appreciate really what Joanne just said, and I think she's right. The plan should acknowledge the sizable residential communities in North University City. Most of the people in University City live north of Rose Canyon, and that should be acknowledged, both their existence and their needs now and in the future. I would also say that the plan should probably highlight the environmental goals and values of the university community much more fervently. I appreciate the separate section on open space and conservation, but I think right at the front, one of the priorities here, and certainly our values here, should reflect that this is the most biodiverse section of the most biodiverse metropolitan area in North America, which means this is one of the most biodiverse places on planet Earth. We should recognize that. We should celebrate that. That should be at the front of the plan, that we know that all these important values that we have in terms of our commercial community, our residential community, our educational communities, our renowned institutions, also included there should be that this is an extraordinary environmental resource, and we've got ecological goals that are equally important with some of those others and need to be balanced. And I think we can do that. I think we should name the community accurately and consistently throughout the plan. This is the university community. We are also called University City. No one in this community refers to it as university. And so I think we can just fix that. Let's just make sure to capitalize it consistently and name it accurately. And we'll know that we're talking about ourselves and not being talked about by somebody else. I think some issues that we're going to need to continue to work on: the affordability inclusionary requirement should be robust, as Roger suggests. It also needs to be studied. It needs to be able to work. And so I think it's appropriate that that work is being done. And I'll expect that it will be robust. I think we need to continue to be worried about displacement of both the lowest cost housing in the university community, the diverse residential communities, in particular the place that Roger named, the southwest corner of Genesee and Regents, which is the lowest cost housing in the university community, is also among the most diverse places in the university community. 2/3 of people live there, people of color. And if we replace that with 219 dwelling units per acre, we're going to displace that community and replace it with a high-rise tower. And the high-rise development on the adjacent corners tell us what that development will be. $4,500 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment is going to replace $2,000, $2,100 a month apartments. We cannot get affordable housing in the university community. We can't get a diverse housing community in university if we take out the oldest and least expensive housing and replace it with the newest and most expensive. And that displacement is a progressive goal everywhere in America, but apparently San Diego. I think we should get on board with what progressives are advocating elsewhere in the United States, which is that we can't be displacing communities like this at the beginning of our plan. We've got to preserve the affordable housing that exists now, and we've got to add to our housing stock as well to get a diverse and affordable community. That's two. There's some concerns also about retail displacement, and those should be obvious. We've got a park deficit here, and that's problematic. We're doubling our park deficit. 4,900 points is the absence of parks for 50,000 people. So we will add to the community, but we are planning for a community in which 50,000 people will have no park. That's what the numbers work out to, right? And I think that tells us, on the one hand, it tells us because the city just undertook a revision of its parks master plan to come up with a new standard for park infrastructure to be provided with development. And that new plan, the new process and the new algorithm tells us that there's too much development being proposed here, unless we can find some more places for park points and more creative park, right? Because the park master plan should work. We just did it. We just redid it. And so it should work. We should be able to figure out how to make it work. There's a couple of places that we should review. UCSD is a problem here. We're counting the population, but not their parks. It should be either all in or all out. That would help. We should count our population accurately. We've got an inaccurate population count for 2020 for our current. So our parks deficit will actually be, well, it'd be greater for now, but the same overall. The JCC is in Mandel Weiss Park. The regulations that created the JCC created it as a public park facility that would be open to the public. And we got to figure out, we got to go back and read what those regulations are, what those agreements are. We got to make sure that the Mandel Weiss Park, its aquatic center, its community center, and its facilities are counted appropriately in the university community as part of our parks, not simply excluded. Because when it was built, it was envisioned that this would be a model for private contribution to parks in the university city. Torrey Pine City Park, I think we need to get some of that right. But so there's some details on the parks deficit that I think we can work on that will get us a little bit closer so that we have an accurate count of how far short we are. Yeah, the proposal for mobility in the MSCP don't work. That's an inappropriate place for mobility, passive recreation, but not mobility trails. We need some stronger language and protections for communities serving retail, I think, especially at Nobel Square, which is maybe not community village right now. We need to make sure that that's also included so that if we do redevelop those sites, that we don't displace all the retail and that we don't put retail and housing into competition with high-tech development there, which is a big threat. And I think that we can rethink some of the height limits in the zoning, especially on the Sprouts Plaza in UC, where we don't have adequate transit, and that might be over generous to consider it as the staff plan suggests. Those are my initial comments, and I wanted to get them to you now, and I'll share them with you in writing and also as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Katie. Who's been waiting patiently. Can you come up and take the mic and maybe stand over next to Carrie so we can get you in the camera view? Yeah.
Fortunately, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fortunately, one of my questions was answered when Linda Bernstein asked about the height things. I was trying to figure out the heights of the various new zonings. But one thing that was very unclear to me, so I'd like some clarification. The plan uses terms like urban village, but in the municipal code, it uses EMX and RMX, and there's very specific rules associated with EMX and RMX. How does urban village and some of the other terms translate to what's in the municipal code so we can understand what we're talking about? And it'd be great if there were a cheat sheet translation tool to get that. I brought this up before, but was it an oversight that the two large churches on Eastgate Mall just east of Genesee are still not marked as institutional? And was it an oversight that the synagogue on Town Center and the high school on Town Center associated with that synagogue are not marked as institutional or school? They're marked as urban village. And then a big one is, will there be a traffic study, or has there been a traffic study? And how does that work with Pure Water on Genesee and construction on Governor? We had the pool construction, now we have the Spreckles construction, and things are not a normal traffic flow at all, but we're talking about road diets and changing things for bike lanes. We need to have accurate data, and I would assume if you're doing an EIR, you need an up-to-date traffic study. Let's see, and the fire safety map in it seems to be new and different from what's available on the San Diego County and city websites. And pretty much everything but Rose Canyon is in a fire zone. I don't understand that because Rose Canyon's kind of combustible. but maybe it's people don't live in Rose Canyon. I'm not sure, but I'd love to know the details behind that fire safety map. So any clarification you give me, Nancy, that'd be great.
Yes, Katie, and thanks for sending your questions ahead of time so I could be a little bit more prepared for them. So in terms of the urban village, those are implemented with both the EMX and the RMX zone. If the level that's taken, so there's the EMX, RMX 1, 2, and 3. And so those correspond to the 3 levels of the urban village. If something is existing commercial, it would be EMX. And if something is existing residential, it would be RMX, unless the property owner contacts me and specifically says that they would like to switch. And the reason why is because of, we don't want to create a lot of non-conforming use problems. So if you have existing commercial development, to move them to RMX without them wanting to move to RMX could cause problems for non-conforming uses. So the plan that's going to come out with the zoning map is that the existing commercial moves to EMX, the existing residential moves to RMX. And if it's 1, 2, and 3, that is based upon how dark the color is on the map. So that was your answer. That's the answer to that one. In terms of the churches on Eastgate Mall, what I was told is that those properties were looking to increase densities. So that is why we indicated them with the land use change on the map, that they potentially would want to integrate housing onto those sites. They could be institutional, but we would still zone them consistent with the adjacent properties. So with religious uses, we're supposed to kind of treat them the same. And so because the neighboring properties would be at increased density, we would be increasing densities on those. We could put an institutional in the land use plan, but the zoning would still be the same. In terms of the synagogue, because the underlying zoning of that property is a commercial use, that's why we did the same thing where we gave them the urban village as well, because of their underlying zoning. If they would rather have an institutional marking in the plan, that would be fine, but they would still be able to develop per the underlying zone. So the places that we are changing the underlying zoning of religious properties, we did show them as change, and that's why they are like that. Where like for the Mormon temple, we're not changing the underlying zoning of that property. So that's why it has an institutional marking. So it's really to show where we're changing the underlying zoning to be the same as the adjacent properties. That's why it's done. But we could put institutional markers on those as well, but they would still be able to use the zoning. So that was that. If anyone is involved in either of those communities and wants to communicate to them, if they want something different, they're welcome to have something different in terms of how they're marked in the plan. But that was why we did it the way that we did it. We will be doing a traffic study mobility analysis as part of the environmental document. That is a requirement. And so that will be available with the environmental document. And that does have to take into consideration pipeline projects, and those have to be acknowledged with the EIR. In terms of the fire map, this is tricky. So talking to our staff that prepared it, that is the most up-to-date data, but we recognize that this map changes. And so we are still discussing internally the best way to acknowledge the policy that is in resilient SD, but maybe not include dynamic maps. So we're going to continue to work on that issue. And if you have suggestions, because this is an area of interest, we are definitely open to suggestions on how to acknowledge some of the fire risks within the community, but recognizing that that map does change, and it will change maybe multiple times within the planning horizon. So we're still working on that, but if you have input, we're all ears.
Hey, thank you, Nancy. At this point, I think we're going to go to members of the Zoom audience. So if I can get Suchi to maybe to start with, do alternating subcommittee and community members.
Sure.
that would be good.
Sure. There are currently 5 raised hands in the Zoom audience. I see one subcommittee member, Aiden. So I'll go ahead and start with Aiden.
Okay, so Aiden Lynn.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by saying thank you to Nancy and to all of the planners for their hard work on this. I know it takes a lot of effort to put this all together, and you're crunching away for some time. So I'm very happy to see this end result, and I'm very excited with the direction that this is going in. I just have a couple comments, and then I have a question. Specifically, I love the 5 Ps. What makes me really excited is the promenade plans on Executive Drive, because I live right next to the Executive Drive, and I think it could definitely benefit from realizing some of the plans that are in this draft plan. I'm also happy with the density, including the density increases that you mentioned at the beginning, Nancy, near the trolley stops, changing some of those lighter purples to some darker purples. And I'm still wondering, between Nobel Drive and Regents, just generally speaking, there's kind of this blotch of lighter purple, and that includes, like, I believe it's like La Scala, I believe it includes Axiom as well, just some other apartment kind of complexes that I know that a lot of students live at. And I was wondering, especially because this area is covered within a mile of the trolley stops, they're flanked by 2 trolley stops, why this area is still a lighter purple instead of a darker purple, going beyond the 109 dwelling units per acre. So that is my question, and whether that is there any room for that to be expanded in the future, in future drafts?
So that area is lighter just to have, in some ways, some diversity in the community, not have everything be at the highest density, but trying to have some variation. It's also further from the trolleys. So, and then some of the properties in there are actually condos. We decided we don't want a land use map that looks like a quilt. We're trying to make it so there's some like consistency with it. So there's a couple of them that we removed because they made the most sense to remove. But basically, we don't want the highest density everywhere. Even downtown has different levels of density in different areas downtown in order to create a more varied community. So that area in there is just the furthest from transit. But they're still being allowed a density increase that if they wanted to redevelop, that they could and do so, and could do so easily.
Okay, thank you, Suchi. Can we get another Zoom audience member?
Sure. I believe there are no other subcommittee members, so I'll just go in the order
community. Yeah.
that hands are raised, starting with Jesse O'Sullivan. Jesse, you should be able to unmute. I'll try one more time, Jesse. You should receive a prompt to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Good evening. My name is Jesse O'Sullivan. I'm Policy Counsel with Circulate San Diego. Thank you for presenting the plan. I had a chance to look through some of it, and it looks like there's some great things in there. The mobility section looks good. If I remember correctly, in an earlier draft, there was not a protected bicycle facility on La Jolla Village Drive or on Genesee through the center. And so it was great to see that there is one now. There's also a lot of flex lanes, which I think looks great. The only criticism I would have there is that there is not a flex lane on Genesee, on the sort of the southern end of Genesee. And I know that that's a place where it's more difficult because that's a place that has a lot of traffic, but that's all the more reason it's important to do one, because buses end up getting stuck in that same traffic. And so we have residents who are choosing a more environmentally friendly mode of transportation, but are still stuck in traffic with everybody else. I'll also say that Circulate, along with the coalition, sent a letter requesting that scenario 1 from last year be included in the environmental impact report. I think it's really important that the city council be able to consider that alternative, since it was the preferred alternative in the community survey. And we will be sending another letter making that ask again soon. Thank you.
Okay, Suchi, next person.
All right, next is Michael Cosma. You should receive a prompt to unmute.
I did, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to quickly draw attention to 2 numbers that were included in the plan that I think could use a little bit more clarification. The first being that 33,000 housing units are going to be added in the UC region of San Diego alone, and then also 59,000 additional jobs are coming to the region. I don't think that the plan, from the limited part that I've looked at it, has a lot of information about like the specific numbers of where the increased housing and jobs are being distributed throughout UC, and then further what the responsibility of other parts of San Diego are to contributing to increasing housing access and also job opportunities.
Okay, Nancy, would you like to try to address some of those questions?
Sure. So where the increases are shown are basically where we're making land use changes, and a simple map that shows where the land use changes are being made is that CPAWS map. So that is on page 190 of the plan. Those are the locations that we see that there would be increases based upon the plan. So that's why we've included the supplemental development regulations to support those change areas. And so that hones that in for you. In terms of other communities, this is, I forgot what number we're on, but this is maybe the 10th community plan that we've updated. Other communities have also had community plan updates that have had significant density increases. I led the development of the Mission Valley plan. Mira Mesa was recently updated. Someone messaged me that this is number 15 that we're working on. So basically the city is doing a strategy to increase density in the most climate friendly areas. And the most climate friendly areas are places that we have the strongest transit investments. And so now that the Blue Line trolley is here and it's been developed, we want to make the most out of the mid-coast. That phrase is used a lot, and that's why we are proposing to increase densities in this area. But many other communities have gone first and have had significant density increases before this one. So it's not only this community.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Suchi, would you enable the next speaker?
The next speaker is Judith Becker. You should be receiving a prompt to unmute.
Hi, Nancy. It looks like you've done a lot of work, and took a lot of care to include what is important to people. I have a deep-rooted fear of fire because I lived in Claremont when the fire came down from Julian, and it was really scary. I mean, fires travel fast and far here. And I see that on your map, you have all of UC identified as a very high fire hazard severity zone. I live in South UC, and we're trapped between 2 canyons with one narrow street that leads across and only 3 emergency exits. And with the increased density that's proposed in these larger development areas at Sprouts and Vaughn's and additionally, I fear for my life. I feel like we're being sacrificed because especially if Governor Drive is changed to 1 lane in each direction with 3 elementary schools, and a middle school down the street, if there's an emergency, say an earthquake that blocks one of our exits, or a fire, people are going to drive to the schools. They have no drop-off or pickup place. They're going to drive to the schools to rescue their children, leaving their cars in the street, and there's going to be no exit. There are also a lot of elderly homes here that care for our elderly. My mother lived in a home just down the street. I don't know how I don't even know how emergency vehicles would get in or out of here. And in the case of emergency to the south or the north, they're going to block our transportation lanes. There'll be no exit. We live in a scary place right here. If all this density is added around us and Governor Drive is converted to a 1-lane, either way, we can't even walk out of here. I'm scared.
Okay. Yeah, thank you
what I
for
have
your
to say.
comment. Nancy, do you want to address any part of the comment on public safety?
Sure. So
And
emergency
access.
services is one of the areas that is studied in the environmental impact report that's going to be prepared that will look at all of those issues. There is fire risk all throughout the city of San Diego. We also coordinate with the fire department is part of the city of San Diego. It's not an outside agency. We have ongoing discussions with them when we do our plan updates in order to coordinate with them. So we cannot eradicate all fire risk in San Diego. That's not possible in this community or any other community, but our plans are looked at by experts to make sure that we are meeting the standards that we need to meet in order to try to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. Suchi, next.
The next speaker is Tom Mullaney. Tom, you should receive a prompt to unmute.
Yes, thank you. The planned density is grossly excessive. It's a kind of a growth mania. The potential capacity here is about 60 years of future growth. So a normal planning horizon is about 20 years. So this added density could be scaled back to about 1/3 of what's being proposed, and it would still be enough. My second item, the parks are terribly unplanned. I worked for 14 years on the 14 months on the park master plan. The planning department set it up to be easy to meet. You get points for a swing set. You get points for a fitness area with a pull-up bar and a sit-up place. And yet they're still 5,000 points short. Who wants a situation where people stay home because the only parks they have are jammed? Tens of thousands more residents would need at least one community-sized park, several neighborhood parks. A few joint use parks and pocket parks aren't going to cut it. As Andy Weiss said, if they can't plan for and provide the needed infrastructure, it's an indication the plan should be scaled back. A third item that's not being discussed is phasing. So the FBA program had phasing. Development could not go forward without standards for transportation and parks being met. The cities dropped that. So developers in UC could go ahead with large-scale development over the next 5 or 7 years. The public facilities could come in year 15, year 20, or never. So the plan really needs some kind of planning, scheduling, phasing to make sure that public facilities are provided at the time of need. And my last point is the city council. So I want to urge everyone in the community and the board to have regular communication with Council Member Kentley and other council members. There should be a campaign of letters and postcards. If Council Member Lee can support the demands to scale back the density, provide park space, and guaranteed public facilities at the time of need, he needs to do that. If he can't do that, the community needs to make it clear that he's not welcome to be the representative of this community because it is essential. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tom. Nancy, do you want to address any part of that?
Those weren't really questions. There is a lot of things he brought up that are adopted policy. Through this plan, we're not going to be changing adopted citywide policy. And that's why in the presentation in the beginning, I identified the adopted citywide policy that we are responding to with this plan update.
Okay. All right, Suchi, next speaker.
Next speaker is Andrea Contreras. You should receive a prompt to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Andrea Contreras. I represent the Robinson Wood Trust, which is the owner of approximately 30 acres adjacent to the Gilman Drive between Via Alicante and Interstate 5. The trust is currently processing an application to vacate the open space easement on its property while leaving the MHPA completely intact. The site is zoned residential. The flat portion of the site along Gilman Drive is not MHPA, it's not steep hillside, and it's not part of the stormwater drainage that runs on the eastern portion of the site. We believe that site is developable, and we think that this is an excellent place where we could put some affordable housing. Putting housing there would support many of the goals of the proposed plan. One, supporting a thriving economy. A variety of much needed housing is required to support a thriving economy. Two, maximizing transit investment success. The site is less than a mile from the new blue trolley stop at Nobel. Three, allowing a variety of new homes. Housing on this site could support low-income families, students, and young professionals. Four, ensuring a sustainable future. Allowing housing on a portion of this site while leaving the MHPA and steep hillsides intact preserve the value of that part of the open space while building transit-oriented residential units reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Five, streets designed for people. Gilman Drive is a planned corridor for the Coastal Rail Trail, providing connectivity of residential use to the trolley, UCSC, shopping, and other commercial uses. Given the existing application to vacate the open space easement on the property and the potential for residential use on a portion of the site, we ask again that the designation be changed to residential, to a split use designation with open space over the MHPA, or that the designation be held in abeyance until the open space vacation is complete. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comment. Suchi, do you want to bring up the next speaker?
Yes, the next speaker is Gail Free. You should be able to unmute.
Oh, yeah, hi. I just want to say, first of all, I just want to say what a fantastic presentation that was by the Planning Committee. And a lot of work went into that. So I think it's really phenomenal. I just want to say that I know there's a lot of concerns about change, and I'm a boomer, and change is hard for anybody. But I think we're in a situation that we all know that we need housing. I applaud the increased density. I don't think it's going to be a problem. I live in a community where we have a lot of increased density. We have the same concerns about fire that everybody else does. And so in earthquakes, I mean, we're all going to be in trouble if there's an earthquake. So I think those are all fears that we can, have a fear about, but we need to build housing for people to live there. I don't know what people who are aging are going to do if we can't get more young people to live in our communities. They're not going to be there to work in our hospitals. They're not going to be there for all the facilities that we're going to need as boomers. So I just want to applaud this plan. It's happening all over San Diego. This is not the only community. So I think I would be on the other side, that you can also reach out to your council member and to give them your support of housing for people who want to live in San Diego and who we need more housing for and more mobility plans. So thank you for this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gail. I guess it's Susan Baldwin. Go ahead, Susan.
Thank you. I had two quick questions. One is, I'm wondering who the consultant is who is doing the affordable housing economic analysis, and when we will be able to see that analysis. And then also I'm asking if land value capture is being considered as part of that analysis. Thank you.
So Kaiser Marston is doing the analysis, and we can share their final report that they give to us when it's available. And no, we're only studying doing an affordable housing requirement as written in the plan.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. All right, that seems to be the list of people in the Zoom audience. Just a minute. In the Zoom audience. So I'm going to go back to some UCPG members. That'll be Karen and Joanne. So Karen, I think you go ahead first, and then I'll have Joanne, because she's got a nice batch of questions to ask. Okay, go ahead.
All right, yeah, a couple of questions for clarification. Under the inclusionary housing element, I found the wording difficult to understand, and that might just be because it's incomplete, and maybe when the numbers are filled in, it'll make a difference. But I was hoping you could explain, because it talks about the only alternative method of compliance is constructing units elsewhere within the plan area, except that 14 or X% of the units must be affordable to households, blah, blah, blah. So it's that last phrase, that except that, I don't understand. It sort of sounds like it's making an exception to the only exception being building the units within the community plan. So if you could just explain that a little bit, that would be helpful to me. The second, I think this is more of just a comment, but for the canyon setbacks, for the setbacks for canyon adjacent lots, it's 50 feet. I don't think that's adequate. You mentioned shading of the canyon by tall buildings, and that is one concern, but the other big concern that I would have with dense development on canyon edges is just the actual impact of the construction and having, foundations and whatnot dug out for large buildings only 50 feet from the edge of the canyon. I'm really concerned about that impact. So I'd like to see that setback be increased, perhaps, some fraction of the depth of the lot up to 100 feet of setback if possible. And then my last question / comment has to do with the retail and commercial services minimums. That seems really inadequate to me. 10% of the space for developments that are between 50 and 100,000 square feet. So that could be as little as 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. Or if it's over 100,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet has to be set aside for grocery, beverages, etc. I don't think in square footage that large. So I have a really difficult time kind of wrapping my head around what is 15,000 square feet, but I'm thinking it's not a lot. So it would be helpful if you could give maybe a little context, like what is a typical grocery store? Is that like just a grocery store? And I wonder if that SDR, Andy mentioned maybe making that more robust. And one possibility, what I would love to see is however much, community serving retail is present on the site now, they have to keep that much. So you can build above it, you can add, but you can't take away. So those are the three things that I would like a little feedback on.
Okay, Nancy, would you like to address Karen's questions?
Yeah, so for the affordable housing, so we structure that the same way we structured the Barrio Logan affordable housing. And so where you have this except is that the 10% inclusionary requirement citywide still allows a fee option per state law. So we have to allow a fee option for the first 10%, and then anything above that 10% is where we could require it to be built on site. And some of those X's are, we haven't decided what the income level is going to be. So it's not just a percentage, but the percentage and then what the income of the people who would qualify for that. So when we have all the details of that prepared, we'll give a memo that explains it better. Affordable housing is a little bit complicated and a little bit tricky. The intention of what we put in there is to say, we're going to have a requirement. It's going to be modeled after the language that was done in Barrio Logan, but we need to do some testing to tailor it specifically to this community. So we'll come back with more information on that. In terms of the commercial, we of course are open to suggestions that you have about the commercial commercial requirement, but to give you a little frame of mind. So a Trader Joe's grocery store is about 10 to 15,000 square feet. A Ralph's is about 30 to 40,000 square feet. So if, as you take a look at this, I know this is something the subcommittee is going to look at probably in detail. If you have suggestions of what that requirement should be, where this is a new thing that we put on the table as part of that. So recognizing that grocery is a changing format and that smaller grocery stores are becoming more common because a lot of people focus on food delivery that don't necessarily come from the local grocery store. We were trying to tailor something that would be flexible for a long-term plan, but at the same time, we're still taking input on this because this is the first time we've put it on the table, but we wanted to put something on the table as a discussion point. So feel free to give us your feedback on that and we can take a look at that feedback in greater detail.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. And I think one thing that Karen suggested, which is, it would be nice to know how big the Sprouts is, how big the Vons is, what are the sizes of our typical stores
I don't know that off the top of my head. I can just
no, I meant
for
perhaps the next meeting, or if we could get that information, I think that would be helpful, because I'm not sure myself what a 5,000 square foot or 10,000 square foot or 15,000 square foot store looks like in the context of our existing supermarkets. But okay, Joanne.
I didn't really plan on talking about grocery stores.
Oh, you don't have to if you don't want to.
I'm going to, because I think there's an important consideration here. It doesn't just apply to the people in our community. And that is that the folks from La Jolla shop in our grocery stores. At least those that are, what should I say? I guess north of the 52. We also have a lot of people, I believe, from Claremont shopping in our grocery stores. And because of the trolley, the same holds true there. So it's not just usage by the people in our community. There's a substantial usage by people outside. And I'll bet you that the Ralph's, maybe even the Whole Foods, keeps track of where people come from by zip code. So it's in terms of the demand, it's there. What I did want to ask about, though, was I don't think we've talked about our neighboring community plans that have either been completed or are in the works right now. And we're not an island. We like to think of ourselves perhaps that way, but what's going on in the neighborhoods adjacent to us is also important. And I wonder if you could give us some, not tonight, but some idea for those planning groups for the neighborhoods around us, what the increase in density is going to look like. I think both in terms of residential and in terms of jobs.
Okay,
Sure.
Nancy?
I would say that the Mira Mesa, it was adopted recently. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but it's very available online. Claremont has a draft plan, at least out. It's not finalized. Kearny Mesa has been adopted, and that is online as well. So they're not hard to find. I think I did in a previous PowerPoint that I gave a couple months ago when I was showing the Sandag projections and how those changed when we had plan updates. I included a bunch of those plan updates in there and what those were, but I could bring it to a future meeting.
Great.
But it's very available.
Thank you. It would be useful to keep in mind.
Okay, I see we have one more member of the audience in Zoom, and then I'm going to wrap up the presentation and thank Nancy. So, Suchi, would you go ahead and bring Jennifer in?
Sure, Jennifer, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, this is a short question. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what unbundled parking is. It's mentioned with respect to the Governor Community Village.
Yeah, so the idea of unbundled parking is that when you have a rental unit, that the cost of renting a parking space is separate from the cost of rent of the unit. So a lot of studies have been done that found that if you don't just provide the parking space with the unit, but rather charge a separate fee for those two things, that it helps people realize the cost of parking. And because of that, they may choose to not incur those costs. So basically it discounts your rent if you don't want a parking spot. So if you take that with not having a car payment, with not having car insurance, all of those things, you may decide that not owning a car may be more financially beneficial to you. So that's something that's also in the code, where we are moving to an unbundled parking situation with rental. So we don't control what parking is charged at, but we do require it as part of the code to make those costs separate on new development.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. So I'm going to go ahead and close comments for this evening. I want to thank all the board members at UCPG for giving their thoughtful comments. I want to thank members of the audience who also gave thoughtful comments. It's clear that the review process has started. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, many details to absorb. We need to take tonight's presentation as a start for review in more detail, particularly of the things you've noticed that you should be looking at in more detail. And 1 week from now, Andy will reconvene the process at UC High School at 6 o'clock. And we will discuss the next, I think we're going to do land use, mobility, and perhaps something else, but the agenda will tell you what the topics for the presentation are. And remember, the plan is available on planuniversity.org. So Nancy, thank you very much. Suchi, you ran a very nice meeting.
Suchi's the
very
best.
hard to do this without the Zoom support. And so we will see you at the UCPG meeting on May 9th, where we will be back to regular agenda material. And we'll see you at the plan update meeting a week from now. So good night.
Thank you.
Thanks all.